lifelong resident of Pennsylvania, having lived from age 4 to 22 in Carlisle. A career stint with J.C. Penney took him to points both east and west in the state, but he returned to Carlisle in 1974 and began a career with Hershey Foods Corporation in 1977, from which he retired. He's had a long-time interest in both local history and writing. The Historical Society published in 2003 a compilation of articles he wrote for the Sentinel in 1975 and 1976. It is available in History on High, the shop. Murder in Carlisle's East End is also available in our shop and is his first formally published effort. And he is currently working on a book about the first 40 years of the car shows that will be published this September. And I've already hit him up for next Wednesdays in winter to talk about that particular subject. He is an active volunteer in various nonprofit groups and is a past president of the Board of Trustees of the Cumberland County Historical Society. He is also a folk art wood carver in the Pennsylvania German tradition, which we do sell his carvings over at our History and High shop, if anybody would be interested. He and his wife Lois have been married 56 years, live in Carlisle, and have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. It is my pleasure to introduce Paul Hope.
Thank you, Linda.
You're very welcome, Paul.
Let me see the hands of people who are not members of the Historical Society. Linda, lock the doors, lock the doors. Okay, Murder in Carlisle's East End. How many of you have read the book? How many of you have not read the book? Oh. Oh. Well, I'm not going to tell you the story too much of the book, so you're going to have to buy it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process of how it came to be, some of the background, and a little bit about the story itself. So, you look pretty friendly, I think. I'm just kind of looking around. Ron, I don't know. There are some people here who help with the book. Sandy Mater's one. She read for me. She read and reread and commented. Randy Watts gave me a lot of information about the old East End. And it was very important. Is there anybody in here who lives in the East End or ever did live in the East End of Carlisle? Well, there's some hands. Good, good. So you'll know some of the things we're going to talk about. Now let's see if we could, okay. One other little thing here to take care of, I think. I don't want you to see all the slides ahead of time. Okay, 1926, Evening Sentinel, July 13th. The murder happened on the 12th, and here's the headline right there. Murders woman for unrequited love, then turns gun on self, but they live. I haven't read the book, have you? Yeah. Norman Morrison was the killer. Francis Bowermaster was the victim on East Louder Street. So we'll get into some more of that in a minute. The original reason that I started on this book was a friend of mine, Earl Keller. Who knows Earl Keller? Everybody. Did you all vote for him when he was commissioner? He wanted me to write a story about Norman Morrison. I'd written a paper for him, for his family on his mother's potato chip cooking business. They used to sell it to the factories. And he said, I want you to write this story about a family friend of ours, Norman Morrison, who killed a woman, shot himself, went to prison, had a religious conversion, got out, and he wanted me to write that story. It's a very inspiring story. I said, fine. And he had done an awful lot of research. He handed me this case that was full of newspaper articles and other background material. So I started to write. And in there was every newspaper report of the trial, some other details. And I wrote, and I wrote. And the more I wrote, the more I thought, who is ever going to turn the next page? Because this is not that interesting to me. I wouldn't even turn the page. And for 2 years, I struggled with that. I did all kinds of things. I started with his death and worked back, and that didn't work either. And struggled and struggled, put it away, get it back out. And then one day, in March of 2013, Kara, standing right back here, put your hand up, Kara. She's our librarian here. And she called me and she said, are you sitting down? So she said, we just got a letter that I'm going to read to you. Well, well, there's the book. You might as well look at it first. Killer, victim, heroine, the baby. It's not coming out the way I want here. Okay. So, there's Norman when he was about 20 years old. Something like that. He was in love with Frances. Now, Norman lived here, 154 Elm Street. You know Elm Street? It's a short street. It's only a block long between Bedford and East. He lived in that red brick house right there. There's Frances when she was about 17, so I imagine that's her high school picture. And there she is with baby Georgia in 1923. Now, Georgia at that point was just a couple of months old. Frances lived in this house, 112 East Lowther Street, right across the street from the Cumberland firehouse. Now keep that in mind, right across the street from the Cumberland firehouse, which had a driver. They all had drivers. Oh, they had to. Had horses for a while, but it really, by this time, was had trouble. Okay, so Norman is courting Frances. She's 13 years older. She's divorced, has 3 kids, the baby, 2 older girls, and he courts Frances. They talk about getting married even. They spend a lot of time on Garrison Lane. Do you know where Garrison Lane is? Down by the Sentinel was an entrance into the Army post. And when one of their walks in Garrison Lane, they talked about getting married. So he started to give her money every payday. He worked Frog and Switch. She worked Carlisle Shoe. And after a while, he bought her some furniture. As they were talking a little bit more about weddings, he bought her a wedding dress. And as time went on, they weren't talking so much of, she wasn't talking about so much about weddings anymore. So he kind of sensed that this whole thing was cooling off a little bit. And Then she wouldn't let him in her house. So one day she wrote him a letter and said, come see me at Penn School. We'll see that in a minute. And so he went there, talked to her. She had the baby with her and a friend. And she gave him a note. He stuck it in his pocket. He seemed friendly enough. On the way home, he took the note out and read it, and she said, we are not getting married. I'm getting married to a soldier from the post. And I am wearing the wedding dress you bought me. Now let that sink in just a little bit. Put yourself in his shoes now. He goes back to his house, gets a pistol, walks up this street, down that street past Penn School, over to her house, shoots her. Then shoots at himself. Shoots at himself. Missed completely. Had one shot left, shot again. It missed his brain, but it shot his optic nerve and he went blind. So she fell to the sidewalk. The baby fell to the sidewalk. A neighbor came, got the baby. And now there's a lot of information in the paper about, it was right across the fire company. They called the police right away. Took him to the hospital. A lot of information about Norman and Francis. But I could never find anything out about the baby. What happened to her? Maybe a neighbor took her. And her name was Georgia McBride. Now there's the market house. That may be the next day after the murder. You can imagine what people are talking about there. The only thing they're going to talk about is this murder that happened down in Carlisle at East End. And East End, Randy, pretty rough place. Blue collar. Well, it was. And to tell you the truth, people in my research, I got a lot of people moving around the East End, but they never moved out. They would move from house to house in the East End. They never left. A lot of them worked at Frog and Switch, shoe factory, foundry. So Norman is taken to jail after he gets out of the hospital. And then he's sent to the state hospital for observation. And they are supposed to, well, first of all, they were supposed to take him to Fairview State Hospital, which didn't have any beds. So they took him to Harrisburg. And the superintendent was waiting and waiting for instructions on what to do with him for 3 years. He was dead. Never got any instruction. They did evaluate him a couple of times. Finally, the superintendent says, we've had enough of this. Sent him back to Cumberland County to the jail. So now he's going to stay in trial because he is not, they've been at the coroner's hearing, but no trial until now. This is 3 years after the murder. And there's the interior of the old courtroom. That's where his trial was. Judge Biddle was the judge. And he lived in that stone house. Anybody recognize that stone house on Palmer Street? Roddenball Barbershop. I need to get there pretty soon. Fred Reese was the DA. He later became judge. Obviously, there's pictures here, but he was the DA. Ivan Goldstein was the defense attorney. You know that name? You know too much about Bessie's house. That's the reason. He was Bessie's attorney. Turns out, if you read the book, you know this, he was also Frances' attorney during her divorce hearing. So the jury stayed in this hotel, which is now Safe Harbor, right over here in this corner. He was found guilty. goes to Eastern State Penitentiary for life. That was his sentence, for life. There are some of the people that were there when he was in prison. You know Al Capone, Willie Sutton, Joe Buzzard. There's an interesting character. Oh, I want to write a book of this sometime. 5 brothers in that family. There were only 5. They were all in the Eastern State Penitentiary. Not all at the same time necessarily, but they were all there. He was one of the last horse thieves in the country, and he says he was the best. They all claim to have sold the things they stole before they stole them. So they were, Willie Sutton was the bank robber. Judge asked him one time why he robbed banks. What was his answer? That's where the money is. Right. Don't tell me what it is. And Al Capone stayed there. If you've been to Eastern State Penitentiary, you've seen that. They have good tours down there. But look at that. That's his jail cell. Used to be that way in Cumberland County. While he was in prison, Norman learned to type. He went into prison kind of bitter, atheist, learned to type, had a religious conversion, and in 10 years applied to the Board of Pardons for release and got it. And would come back to Carlisle a couple times a year. Now there's Earl Keller right there. Cute little devil, isn't he? And there is Norman. There's a guy named A.C. Brubaker. Anybody remember him? And the rest of it is the Keller family. Earl's dad, right there. The Brubaker, or Burkholder family from Newville. Sam Burkholder. Well, that's his, these are his nieces. And Morrison knew them through her. I can't remember her name now, but she was a nurse in Philadelphia. So he, when he got out of prison, went to live in a Pennsylvania working home for blind men. There were about 200 there. And they made chairs and they made little placemats and throw rugs and that kind of thing. So he lived. And he would also teach Sunday school, preach all around Philadelphia. He's getting an award. He did a lot of work and talk for blind, the blind cause for blind people. He's getting an award right here. And he died, 1960, buried in Westminster Cemetery. He was 61 years old. Now, I should have told you in the beginning there weren't any rules here. You can ask questions anytime you want to. So does anybody have any questions on Norman Morrison?
How old was he when he got out of prison?
How old was he? Let's see. He was 27, 30, 40, just about 40.
Was he completely blind or blind in one eye?
He was blind in both eyes, but he was, I don't think he was completely blind, but he needed someone to lead him around, and he learned Braille. Matt?
That was my question.
Okay, yes, sir.
What did they do at the Harrisburg Hospital? Were they just trying to rehabilitate him?
Yeah, they put him in the violent ward because he was a criminal, but they didn't try to do anything else with him.
And then what?
Every once in a while,
They decided they had done what they couldn't send him back.
they decided that nobody told them what to do with him, so rather than spend their money, they were going to spend the county's money to send him back. Uh-huh. There's the question, what grounds was he pardoned? Why was he pardoned after a life sentence? It turns out a lot of people were. I've read several other instances where this prison was probably crowded, for one thing. After 10 years, several people got released, he had lots of references from that's prison chaplain, the Lutheran Brotherhood or something, well, that's not the real name of it, but the Lutheran organization who were going to guarantee his good behavior when he got out, and they were going to take care of him. Any other questions?
Was he convicted of first-degree murder, and he reduced to third degree, and so he get out, or how did he do that?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe he's convicted of first-degree murder. I don't think they reduced the charge here. They just signed off on it.
Well, they gave it a pardon, you said.
Yeah.
So-
The Board of Pardons,
Yeah. Oh,
whatever, and I couldn't find a record of what they gave him. I don't know what they would have called that. All right. So now you can see, trying to write a book about that, get a little burdensome. What is it? What's going to make them turn? The trial was very interesting. You turn the pages through the trial, and there are a lot of details in the book about the trial. But once you get past that, it's not so much fun anymore. All right. There's the rest of the story coming up here. Now, Kara, it's your turn. So she called me, said, you sitting down, I want to read you something. So here's a letter that she got in the mail. Can you see that? You can't see it? I'll read it to you. To whom it may concern, I'm writing this letter because members of my family want answers to some questions, but I can't remember some of them myself. I'm from Carlisle, PA. I was born and raised there. I left when I was 19. Some things were good, some bad. And here's where it really gets dicey. I was 3 years old when my mother was killed on July 12th. All of a sudden, we found her. She went on with more questions, but it was pretty exciting to know that this woman was still around. 89 years old then. And she signed it with her name, her address, and her phone number. Now she lives near Allentown, in a little town called Walnutport. Anybody know where Walnutport is? Okay? That's where she lived with her husband, lives. And she had a phone number on there, so I called her right away. Told her I'd been working on a book about this, and could I come and see her? Could Earl and I come and see her? And she hesitated a little bit, and she said, yes, you can. But when she hung up, she called Kara. What'd she ask you, Kara?
If I could vouch for you and Earl, you were okay.
What'd you say?
Well, she let you come, so.
So we were within a week, we were up there to see her. And here's what we found. And beside her was her husband. Now he's 93, I think, in that picture. This was March or April of 2013. She looks perky, doesn't she? And you saw her handwriting. Yeah. And she is perky. She doesn't just look perky, she is. I went back off of that one a little bit. So Earl and I talked to her about what I was doing, and she told us a little bit about her life in Carlisle. It didn't sound very good, but it sounded like she might want to tell us some more. So I talked to her and asked if she would write to me, give her my address. Maybe you can write some things down. So she did. She wrote, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages. She always wrote on the yellow tablet by hand. 3 or 4 pages, front and back. She didn't waste anything. And then I would either call her or write back to her, thank her for it. Then I'd call her again or write to her. She'd send me a couple more pages. And that went on 3 or 4 times. And one day, this is it, 39 pages. Wow. 39 pages of stuff. Her whole life, from the murder to the time she got settled in Allentown. And this is the last page. I can't believe I wrote all this stuff. Maybe it's a good thing I got it all off my chest and I put it to rest. I think it was. I think she really kind of needed that. Because she had not told many people. Her family didn't know a lot of this. Her husband did, but her family didn't. I often wonder what he, and I'm going to get into the he in a little bit, told the people at the children's home and the school. It must have been all bad. People who know me and our neighbors knew what he was like and knew I wasn't a bad person. That bothered me for years. I guess I went a little overboard. I'm sorry, so use only what you want. Hope it's okay. Thanks for all your help, and it was a pleasure meeting you. Georgia and Tony. Now, she wrote the rest of the book. Everything that's in that book came from these yellow pages. And nothing is, I couldn't make it up. And believe me, I couldn't ask her some of the things she wrote in here. It made it to the book, but I would never dare to ask her about it. So, let's see where we go from here. There she is when she's 6 years old. When her mother was killed, she went to live with a sister, older sister, for a very, very short time, maybe a couple of days. And then her grandparents took her. And they lived also in the East End, but within a few months, her grandmother died. Now she was with her grandfather. They moved a couple of times in the East End and were up on West High Street for a little while until he died. He died when she was 5, so her mother was killed when she was 3. Her grandfather died when she was 5. Only a couple of years there. Then her sister took her for a little while. Her sister was married to an Army officer, and he was reassigned to Hawaii and couldn't take her. So her sister put her in the car, took her, well, that's High Street, took her to 245 East Lowther Street. Knocked on the door, and a man came to the door, and her sister said, I know all the stories, she's yours. And she said to this little 5-year-old, this is your father. And she turned around and left. And her father is Mike Smith. Now, Mike Smith is the he that she's writing about in that last page. But even before that, it's key to know that he was the driver, guess I don't have it, the driver at the Cumberland Fire Company, right across the street from where Francis lived. So, I mean, there's a lot of love there, isn't there? Warmth. You can almost feel it. Again, ask me questions if you got them. Don't wait till the end. That is his fairly recent wife. He was married and divorced and then single for a while, but that's not his first wife there. She brought a daughter with her when she came to live there. You might recognize that house. It's the second house over the Leetort, if you're going east on Lowther Street. I drive past there a lot going down that end of town. And I always look in there. I can just picture her. growing up there. Now, when she had to move in there, they put her in a room that had the only toilet in the house. That was her room. When somebody had to use the bathroom, she had to turn her face toward it. There was a lot of abuse in that house from her father. Emotional abuse. I don't think he ever physically abused her, but emotionally, it was awful. And I'll just tell you one little thing. She went to this school, first grade. She was nervous. You know, now she has not been able to build up a lot of self-confidence here these 5, 6 years. She had to go to the bathroom, and she kind of put her hand up a little bit. Either the teacher didn't see it, or she just ignored it, and Georgia wet her pants. The kids started to giggle, and the teacher came back and saw what happened. And it was close to the end of the day. She says, "Fine, honey, that's okay. You can go home. Just go ahead. It's no problem." Well, she had to walk past Mike Smith, who was sitting out in front of the firehouse. And she knew if he ever saw what had happened, she was going to be in big trouble. So she kind of wrapped her sweater or whatever it was around her and went past. He never said a word, didn't even say hello. That's the way he was. She went down, went in the front door, made it, and turned around. He was right behind her. And he said, "You wet your pants. Take them off. Put them on your head. And get out and walk up and down the sidewalk." Now the kids were coming home from school. And he made her walk up and down the sidewalk. Very indicative of what was going on here. She was pretty popular at school. She was good grades. She couldn't interact with his family very well, so she stayed in her room and studied all the time. She got good grades. Here she was in the 6th grade play, Queen Mighty. I don't know if anybody knows these names. Blake Spar, Richard Wetzel. Okay, here's a school down near Philadelphia called the Martha P. Falconer School, Layton School. She mentioned bad girls, the school for bad girls. This is it. We would call it a reform school.
Okay.
She didn't go that far. But she did something and swore at Mike Smith and left for overnight. Within days, she was down at the school. First, she was at the orphanage. Then somebody came and took her to the school. But at the school, again, she was very popular. She helped us start a new paper for the school. She said, and I said something about, was this school for bad girls? Because I had read that somewhere. And she said, well, the bad girls were down the other end of the school. We were up on this end.
Now, how old is she there when she got sent there?
She was 15, 10th grade. So she was there for 10th, 11th, 12th grade.
3 years.
3 years. Happiest 3 years of her life to that point. Because everybody loved her. She had friends, they danced, they had dances, they had parties. I'm missing a picture here, but in her senior year, she was elected May Queen. So she was Queen of the Court during her senior year. Very popular. She came back to town, got a job at Pizzo, cutting crystals. Now, those ladies who worked at Pizzo cutting crystals made very, very good money in those days. Mike Smith actually got her that job, then took some money for rent, took some money for food. But she and a friend would go out for walks, and one day they walked past Black's Roller Rink. Now, who remembers Black's Roller Rink? Oh, yeah, hands up there. I don't think I do. But I might. Yeah. Black's Roller Rink right there. Well, she and her friend found themselves down there. They didn't head out for Black's Roller Rink, but they were there, and she looked in the door, and this Italian soldier was looking out, and they smiled at each other. What did she do next? Who read the book? She bought a pair of roller skates. She's no dummy, let me tell you.
Excuse me, for those that are not as old as you, there's Black's Roller Rink. Yes.
Black's Roller Rink, okay, that's down almost beside the Sunnyside restaurant. Across from the Church of God Home. Good question, thanks for asking. So she learned to roller skate. And she went there every chance she could get, she went there to roller skate. And sure enough, one day the Italian soldier asked if he could walk her home. Well, you could probably hear her heart beating. And partway home, he said, "Don't get too excited. I walk a different girl home every night from here." And she was crushed. But they would go, she knew the soldiers hung out at the Texas. And she and a girlfriend went in there for lunch one day, and sure enough, there he was. And they reunited forever from there on. He is good looking. So is she. That is right before they got married in 1942. Now, he was in the Army. They did get married. They had an apartment on East Lowther Street, I think in the first block of East Lowther Street. There was only one way, they knew there was only one way, and I'm not going to tell you what it was until you read the book, that Mike Smith would allow them to get married. And so they worked that out. I hear a giggle someplace. And then he was deployed to Tinian Island to train to invade Japan. So before he left, he took Georgia up to his family in Allentown. An Italian family. They welcomed her with open arms. She couldn't be happier. He, while his group was training to invade Japan, saw a plane take off, didn't realize it at the time, but it was the Enola Gay. And so they never did invade Japan. He came back within a year, I think, and there they are 70 years later. Now, he died about 3 months ago. She sent me a letter, 4 pages this time. First 2 pages, she said, I was going to call you, but I knew I'd cry, and so I'm writing. And I've lost the love of my life, and she goes on, I miss him so much, first 2 pages. Second 2 pages. Weeds are growing out here, I need to get them pulled, the walls need painted, I've got some other jobs to do, but just the way she was with everything. No matter how bad things were, she'd bounce right over it and get on with her life. And so, she is now 91. And still perky. I was going to call her right before I came today, but I didn't quite want her thinking about it while we were here. So, I'm going to give a talk again in May, and I'm going to try to get her down here. She was going to come down for the book signing when the book was first released last June. Her son had a stroke. He was the one who was going to bring her down. Her husband's in bad shape. Her son has a stroke, and her daughter was in bad shape. But she just kept chugging along. I saw a hand.
You answered my question. I was going to ask if they had children.
They have 2 children now, yeah, and she has grandchildren. She said something about maybe getting her granddaughter to bring her down, but I know Earl would love to go up and get her. He didn't want we would have done it today, but he didn't want to drive from Florida to Allentown to pick her up. Okay, any more questions? She's a very, very inspirational lady. Sandy, would you say that?
Yes, yes.
If you want to be inspired, you need to read her story. Questions?
When did she finally leave the Carlisle?
Well, she was 19.
19.
Yeah. Yeah, 19. So she came back when she was 18, lived here for a year. They got married, and then he got sent overseas and took her downtown.
Okay, but then
She's been back a couple of times, but not recently.
What about her siblings and the relationship with them?
Okay, she had two sisters who, and I think this is true, she says could never deal with the fact that their mother was what she was and died the way she did. And so they had problems with it. Now, the reason I say I believe that is because I've had some correspondence with George's nieces and nephew, and they're learning things they never knew about. And they say, you know, it's good to hear about our grandmother and what happened. So they were both in California. They also married Army officers. That must have been the thing to do.
military base.
And took off, ended up in California. But they're both passed away.
Oh, she's the-
Was her mother married to Smith?
No.
Okay.
Oh, no. Oh,
No, okay. That's my question.
no. No.
So it was her father, but that's when she was going to marry, I take it.
No.
Things haven't changed.
She was just a friend of his. Well, that's a good question. I mean, there was no DNA testing, obviously. Everybody had agreed that was her father. Yeah, but he didn't say no. He just said, "Get in here." Yeah, George.
He was not the father of the older two?
No.
Did they have the same father, or don't you know?
Lois asked me that day before I left the house. I said, I don't know.
Who knows?
Who knows? Now, her husband, her ex-husband, a guy named McBride, help me, Randy, you remember his first name? No. Jim, might have been Jim. Yeah, Jim. James McBride was her ex-husband. He was in the pool room up around the corner. There was a little grocery store with a pool room, I guess in the basement, when he heard the shots. He was the first one to get to her. She was already dead. But he didn't make any claims on any of the kids. So I don't know. He was pretty abusive too, if you read the divorce proceedings in the book. He was no sweetheart. Jason? Go ahead, Jason. We're going to make him wait.
Well, I have kind of a wrap-up question, so maybe I'll...
Okay. Bob?
Being involved with the Historical Society and this book and everything, two items would really intrigue me. The wedding dress, I wonder whatever happened to that, and her roller skates.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I've given this talk 6 or 7 times. I gave it last week in Mechanicsburg, and it's the first time I got the question, whatever happened to the wedding dress? And now I get it again. Last week, I had no answer. There was only about 12 people, and they weren't near as smart as you are. So, I'm going to have you help me here. Let's write a short story. What happened to that wedding dress? What do you think happened to that wedding dress? Anybody, give me a... If you were going to write another page...
He destroyed it.
There's a story. What would it be?
Auctioned at Rouse.
Auctioned at Rouse. It was auctioned at Rouse auction. Might have been. Maybe the skates were there too. Actually, we know what the skates looked like. We know a picture of her skates, but she, in her letter, wrote what kind of skates they were. And I these days, all you need to do is,
Google.
oh, there it is. So that's the kind of skate she had. It was Chicago, something or other number, or this or that. She knew. She may still have those, to tell you the truth.
Two older girls have gotten,
Pardon?
would the two older girls have gotten the skates and the dress?
They may have. They may have, although, well, they may have. They, maybe she was buried in a wedding dress. That's an interesting, now there's a last page for you.
It's Italian, most likely it's
Yeah.
Catholic, and what about her religious affiliation?
Catholic. Yeah, she was, Mike Smith was Catholic. It's very interesting in the book. He made him get married twice. Second time in Catholic church, and she didn't know he ever went to church. She just knew the priest came to see him and drink whiskey and play cards. But
I assume that Georgia got a copy of the book, and if she did you have any comments after she read it?
oh, Georgia, copy of the book? You kidding me? Yeah, she got a copy. Well, she got several copies because she went in for her family.
Yeah.
Did she have any comments? She had several comments on the whole process because I kept her pretty much in tune before it ever was released. So when she read just the draft, she said, oh, I just read my life story. And then I sent her the cover, the art for the cover, and she liked that. She liked what was on there. And she seemed pretty happy with the book. And she wanted half a dozen copies or whatever.
Did you have to do any corrections? She read the book and said, this is not right or something?
No,
Everything was accurate in there, and she,
everything was off those yellow pages.
okay. Sometimes people want to gain stuff.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to get back to the dress, and I'll get to one other thing, too, if I can remember it. But I think, here's what I think happened to the dress. It just got lost. But it had her name in it. She had written her name, Frances McBride, in the dress. And went to a thrift shop. And somebody bought it, took it home. And lo and behold, it ends up, generations later, in her granddaughter's hands to get married in. Shannon, you're shaking your head. You don't believe that for a minute. One other question. Oh, now I forgot. Jason?
No, I just want to make a comment that Paul worked closely with me and the staff over this past year as the president, developing the concept of history through sharing stories. And I think this is a perfect example of how the historical side is trying to do that. And Paul is definitely an advocate for that sort of concept, and also how history is an ever living, dynamic, moving, and it doesn't stop. And you can see that photograph behind Paul is definitely indicative of that. And if you wanted to say anything else about that, it's just a general comment.
Well, that's true. Everyone in here has got history. You've got stories. You think they're stories, but they are stories of history. They're the way our history is developed. We're living it. You have stories that you brought with you. You have stories that you don't know yet. You walk out the door, you're going to develop more stories. And so all those come together to make the history of the community of Cumberland County. And share them. Share them here, share them with your friends. In the book, I did thank my friends for not yawning every time I told this story, because I told it over and over. And I was really kind of looking for somebody to say, no, don't write that. But either they were too polite. I know they were too polite.
How long did it take you from the time you started to the time you...
It took me 3 years, but the first 2 years were struggling with Norman Morrison. The third year was just writing what she told me and working with the editor. And the editor would say, you know, you ought to change this, and this doesn't sound quite right, or move it to there, or whatever. Randy?
Just one thing, if everybody could think about what Paul just said, a true historian, when they write history, they use numbers and figures, and they talk about this plant was here, and these people were here, and these things happened. But look how alive this just made that neighborhood. And all of you have a story. If you go home today and write even 2 or 3 pages about experience, about a neighborhood, about people you remember, bring it in here, put it in a folder. 100 years from now, you'll be alive, the statistics will be alive, and it really means a lot. And Paul, you've done a great job. Really thank you for what you've done today.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I got one more question, and don't forget the books are on sale at the History on High Shop.